Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another short history lesson with Miss Warren. This one, I promise, will be short because we don't really talk about the American Revolution a whole lot in world history. That's American history. So we're going to talk about it as this thing happens to set off the next revolutions. So let's get at it. So, first and foremost, we know that the American independence was kind of this result of Britain setting up the 13 colonies. And at this point in history, the 13 colonies were pretty much self governing. Great Britain took a very hands off approach to the affairs that were going on in the 13 colonies. But then all of a sudden, the French and Indian War break out. So Great Britain and the colonies versus French and the Native Americans. In Europe, this was called the 7 Years' War, as we have talked about. And because of this struggle and this fighting between Great Britain and France in Europe, and then the colonies and natives with, Great Britain and France's help, they ended up spending a lot of money and just, hundreds of people died. So British finally won a swift victory and gained all of the French lands in America, but also they started to incur a lot of wartime debt. So this created some rising tension between the colonists who were now being forced to pay for this wartime debt and the government in Great Britain, because the government in Great Britain raised taxes on many of the goods. So you have the Stamp Act, you have the sugar tax, you have all of these things that are put in place to basically make colonists pay the debt, which makes total sense because the colonists were the ones going to Great Britain saying, hey, we need your help with this Native American problem. And then when Great Britain comes along and helps and accrues all this debt because of colonial wars and affairs, it should be the colonies who pays for this debt. But that's not the way we look at it. So there was this incredible amount of tension and unrest in the colonies, and it came to a head with the Boston Massacre, and this would end up turning into the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Massacre, don't exactly know what really happened. We don't really know who shot first or who told whom to shoot first, but what ended up happening, the way the story goes, is that a shot was heard or the fire command was given, but don't know if it was given by the British soldiers' superior or if it was somebody in the crowd. But British soldiers openly fired onto or into a crowd of people in Boston. And people were upset by this, and especially upset by the fact that the British troops were tried and then handed back to Great Britain for disciplinary procedures. And that led to the Tea Party. So the tea tax is what really pushed everybody over the edge. So people dressed up as Native Americans boarded a British ship that had tea on it and dumped the tea in the harbor, thus officially starting the American Revolution. But the empire does strike back. You see what I did there? So you have the Intolerable Acts of 1774 that essentially limited the freedoms of the colonists. So it closed the Boston Harbor after the Tea Party incident until the East India Trading Company had been reimbursed for the tea that they had destroyed. Totally makes sense to me. You break something, you buy it, right? This act also granted colonial governors the right to quarter troops in public and private buildings. And quartering troops just basically means that they could walk into your house and say, hey, now these troops are going to live with you and eat with you and basically take care of you. So the colonies responded by establishing the First Continental Congress. And there they were to discuss and list out their grievances to the British government. Sorry, The Empire Strikes Back. I gotta do it. There was a lot of unrest. Specifically, you saw the tarring and feathering of human people. So, humans are people. I don't know why I said that. Whatever. So, you actually had people who were being dragged, like undressed or their tops ripped off, and they would pour tar on them and then hit them with feathers. Oh, yeah. So the Continental Congress met and they did work together. It would take multiple times for them to actually list out the grievances and agree to send it to Great Britain because of Georgia. Georgia was the one who was the fiercely loyal colony to Great Britain, and they really kept pushing to, find a way to work together. And then you have Lexington and Concord. This is the first official battle, the shot quote heard round the world, and that was the start of the Revolution. It actually comes from Schoolhouse Rock. I'll show you the video. Don't worry about it. So you've now officially have the War of Independence that has started in the North, but it takes a little bit longer to get to everyone else because especially the Southern colonies are like, why are we going to have to fight for Northern independence? This doesn't make sense. It wasn't until a list of grievances that was sent to the king, King George, and George's response was basically, screw you guys. And that's when Georgia got on board. And on July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress ratified the Declaration of Independence. And they borrowed a lot from John Locke. Dun, dun, dun. We talked about this yesterday. And it was decided later on that George Washington would actually lead the Continental Army, which is kind of interesting because George Washington wasn't necessarily this glorified colonel that we made him out to be in history classes, but he ended up leading the Continental Army, and the war went really bad. He couldn't get enough weapons, he couldn't keep people, the winters were harsh. They were pretty much outmatched and outgunned. And then we have the French come and turn the tide of war. All I can hear is Hamilton. The French brought guns in sheaves, and so the balanced chiefs. Sorry, I love Hamilton. I'm not sorry at all. So at Yorktown, that's where the things turn, and the French show up, and this army that was supposed to lose ends up defeating the largest army in the world at this point in time. And then you have the Treaty of Paris. In 1783, the Americans officially were granted independence and British lands to the Mississippi. So that means they got a huge chunk of what we now call the United States from Great Britain. So what's the impact of this revolution? Well, the US Constitution united all of these colonies together as states with a strong government. Eventually, the Articles of Confederation were terrible. I'm going to tell you that right now. They were absolutely terrible. But eventually, we would come back together and establish the US Constitution that united all of the states together under a strong central government. It created 3 branches, which they borrowed from Montesquieu, and they would set up to where you have federal and then state and local governments. So you had checks and balances all the way up the ladder, so to speak. And this actually allowed the United States to become an economic and political powerhouse. That would take us a few years and we would stumble along the way, but the United States would be a force to be reckoned with. Another impact is that the British remained a global power, except they no longer were focusing in the West, they were focusing in Asia. And this also allowed other American colonies to fight for their independence, specifically Latin America. It also led to the French Revolution, which we'll talk more detail about both of those, the French Revolution and the Latin American independence movements, in the next 2 videos. See you guys later.